Hey everyone, today we're going to talk about should you keep Medicare if you're still working? And I have with me Jeremy Weiser, the CEO. I'm the founder of PlanFit, and we're going to talk about how this works and just have a discussion about it. So Jeremy, let me ask you the question first. If you're still working, should you have Medicare?
This is a really interesting question because so many people are working now beyond the age of 65. I mean, every time you go out to shop, every time you go to a restaurant, every time you interact with somebody in a professional career, you see people all the time, they're working now into their 70s, their 80s, even sometimes in their 90s, and it's great to see that.
True.
But a lot of people think that they need to keep their employer coverage, or they're taking retiree group coverage, which is a whole nother can of worms that we probably should get into at a later time. But let's just talk about if they work for a large employer. And in the eyes of Medicare, that's 20 or more employees. If there are 20 or more employees at your work, you're covered from that employer plan, then your employer plan is primary. So it will supersede anything that Medicare does. And you have a decision to make then. Do you stay with that employer plan, or do you look to go down the Medicare road and actually pick a Medicare plan? It really depends on the person's situation and what their employer plan is covering. If you have high deductibles and co-pays and you're paying a high premium for your employer plan, you might want to consider a Medicare option because you may find that you save money or you get better benefits, hopefully in some cases both. But it's really a case-by-case scenario, an analysis that we need to do plan to plan.
So if someone is working and they have a group that's smaller than 20, and by the way, when we say group, we're not talking about how many people are in the group, it's actually employed. So if there are more than 20 employees in your company, your group plan is primary and Medicare is secondary. That's a really, really important factor that I'm sure we're going to dig into a little bit. But if you have fewer than 20 people at work, then it's totally different. So we probably should talk about that scenario because you could make a big mistake there and you could end up in a situation where Medicare is primary, but you didn't take Medicare and you were eligible for it.
There's a lot of small businesses operating with under 20 employees. And they could be family businesses that have been around for decades, or it could be that you're the receptionist working for that small law firm, and now you're aging into Medicare and turning 65. In that case, if you take Medicare, A and B will be primary to any employer plan that you have in place. And so that is the opposite of the other scenario. Now we need to figure out how we get full coverage for you, because as everyone knows from watching other videos, original Medicare is not going to give full coverage. There's the deductibles and there's the cost sharing involved there, the co-insurance that's associated with original Medicare. So we have a lot of exposure. And so that's why we need to really seriously consider a Medicare plan. There are mistakes that people make, whether it's the small group, the less than 20 employees, or whether it's more than 20 employees. In both capacities, something that's so important we should talk about is COBRA. A lot of people are unaware of this. COBRA in Medicare's eyes is not considered creditable coverage. So what that means is if you are employed, you're eligible for Medicare, and you're leaving that job and you go, great, I'm going to take COBRA because, hey, it's the same as my health plan that I just left.
Big mistake.
Big mistake that somebody makes because they get what? Bit by the cobra snake. It's not considered creditable coverage, so they can be left with lifetime penalties, or they may have to wait until they can actually elect to take Medicare coverage. This is a really scary scenario to be in. We want to make sure people don't make that mistake. And the other mistake that I often see, and I know you've seen it in your career, is people that have taken Part B, so they're actually paying for Medicare Part B, which, by the way, is automatic if you're collecting Social Security. A lot of people defer Social Security. But if you are already collecting Social Security, or you have just elected to take Part B because you thought you had to when you turned 65, and they're covered by their employer plan, they're paying for Part B for no reason. So they're paying that money to Medicare every single month, and they don't need to unless they are now going to go on the Medicare route and actually pick a Medicare plan.
Yeah, that's a really good point, because when you're paying for the Part B, that also means that your Part B started already, and when you go to leave your group plan, then you're going to have other problems. For example, if you want to go to a Medicare supplement, your Part B has already started, and you can't get a supplement without going through medical underwriting. You don't get that guarantee issue right because you wasted it, not realizing that you didn't need Part B because your group plan was there. It depends on the size of the group. It depends on whether or not you're going to delay and get a Medicare supplement later. If you need that extra coverage for Medicare Part A, it depends on how much your group plan costs. There's a lot of factors there to determine should you go with the group plan or not.
This is what I would do. If it was me, or if it was my parents or my grandparents, I would just look. and I would see what is out there in the Medicare world. We're here in Southern Nevada. We obviously help people all over the country, but just in Southern Nevada, there's over 70 plan options. So is it possible that one of them could be better than what I currently have? Or at the very least, the worst case scenario is they learn something and they realize why their employer plan is so important. Then there's the other scenario where they do realize it's better, but they have a dependent spouse that is not eligible for Medicare. So they're 65, and I'm so excited, right? You know how in life there's those ages where you're just so excited. Like 16, you get your license, and 21, you can go to a bar.
So many people told me this when I turned 65. Like, I didn't think I would be excited to take Medicare. And now I'm like, I can't wait till I turn 65. And I haven't been excited about a birthday in a long time.
Yeah. When I would get those calls and someone say, hey, I'm turning 65, my first thing I say is, congratulations, you're turning 65, you're getting Medicare. Because for most people, it's a big savings.
Yeah.
And they're excited about it, but they have a spouse that's 62.
Yeah, in that case, you just can't do it. You've got to cover that spouse.
Yeah.
And that's another important factor that I'm glad you're bringing out, because earlier we didn't talk about that factor. But if you have dependents, if you have a spouse, if you have people that are relying on you for health coverage, you really have to keep that group plan. So you've got to figure out, how do you go about that? Is it a large group, a small group? What should you do? Because you need to keep that coverage in order for your spouse or your dependents to be covered. And people say, well, at 65, am I going to have dependents? Well, under the ACA now, you can have dependents up to 26. Is it possible? My daughter will probably not be 26 when I turn, actually she won't. She won't be 26 when I turn 65. So I might be one of those people that's saying, I need to cover my daughter still before I go on Medicare. So that is a really, really important factor. Do you need to have someone else covered under your group plan? Because if you do, you can't leave your group plan. You've got to keep that.
Unless your spouse has the option to get employer coverage themselves.
That's true.
Two spouses working and they both have group plans. And maybe one spouse's group plan is not as good. But when you look at the whole scenario, right? You look at the Medicare route with the other spouse's group plan, maybe the net is actually better.
There's another scenario too that we should flesh out here, and that is that there's the whole ACA Obamacare plan. It could be better for some people to leave their group plan and have their spouse go on an ACA, Affordable Care Act, Obamacare plan, and maybe get a subsidy because it's based on income. So if your income is also an important thing here. If you have high income, then you're not going to qualify for any help or any subsidy with the Affordable Care Act.
Right.
So you need to keep your group plan. But if you have lower income, then maybe going to an Affordable Care Act plan for your spouse could be more advantageous. So that scenario doesn't work out too often.
Right.
But once in a while it does.
Yeah. There's a lot of factors. And that's why I say the worst case scenario is you look at it and you go, okay, I can't do anything about this. I'm in the right place. Best case scenario, maybe you save money. Maybe you get access to doctors that you didn't have access to before. When you're 65 or when you're in your 60s, you're leaving, and you're retiring, you're going into the Medicare conversation. What is more important than your health?
Yeah.
Whenever I buy something, if I buy a couch, I research it for 3 months. I'm so in depth with it. I'm so in detail.
You should go with me. I'm an impulse buyer.
Yeah, I know. I'm researching everything. And it's so funny because some people, when it comes to these really important health decisions, it's hard for them to really research it in depth. And I do not blame them because it's so darn complicated that it helps to have a guide.
Well, I think that would be interesting to share perhaps some of the experiences that we've had, because we've helped tens of thousands of people make this decision about Medicare, but we've also seen people make the wrong decision. Do you have any examples of people that have made the wrong decision and suffered for it?
Certainly the COBRA one is terrifying.
Yeah.
And you would think it would change. There's been bills introduced before to change the legislation on this.
We've literally been in Washington lobbying to try to get this changed for years.
Yeah. And so it's just, it's very dangerous. First of all, HR departments are wonderful. They care about their employees. They're trying to inform them to make the right decisions. But I've seen it. We've talked to HR departments where they are actually incorrectly informing their employees.
There's a lot to know in HR, and you can't possibly know all the Medicare rules. I mean, that's our entire profession, and we've spent years and years figuring that out.
Yeah.
And we still get surprised by something now and then.
Yeah.
So certainly when it comes to Medicare, don't take advice from your HR department. When it comes to what decision to make there, you really need to figure out for yourself and work with someone who's a specialist in Medicare.
Right. The other mistake I often see is people just picking the wrong plan.
Yeah.
You know, they saw an 800 commercial on TV from insurance carrier and they called that directly.
Yeah.
Or they went online and they went directly to an insurance carrier's website. And there's a lot of insurance carriers out there. And if you speak to one of them directly, they're going to tell you about their product. They can't tell you about all the options available in the marketplace. For example, we often see people with a Medicare supplement where their Medicare supplement and their prescription drug plan is from the same carrier.
Oh, yeah.
Usually that's an indication that they just went to what person who only represents that carrier.
Yeah.
Because it's so rare.
That's a rare situation. You usually won't have one insurance company if you're going with the Medicare supplement and a prescription drug plan, that's for sure. Well, I've also seen a lot of people, we're talking about people that have been hurt. I've seen a lot of people damaged making the wrong decision when it comes to, should I keep my employer plan or should I leave it? One example that I had was, I had a client that this was many years ago. They said, you know what, I have this opportunity to get off of my group plan. And so I'm very excited about it. We ran the numbers and thought that this was going to be a great deal. And he didn't actually disclose to me his income. And so that became a really important discussion that we've always had ever since. What's your income?
Yeah.
Because it turns out that this person had a very high income. And when they left their group plan, when you have a very high income, you have to pay more for Medicare.
Yep.
And so you don't pay the $185 that most people pay.
Right.
In fact, you could pay $600 a month plus. So that person then ended up paying a lot more and realized, oh my goodness, I'm not saving any money leaving my group plan. My group plan was manageable in cost. And now with Medicare, I have this very, very expensive premium.
Yes.
So that's a scenario where I saw on one side where it didn't work out.
I've had the same scenario. This is called IRMA, Income-Related Medicare Monthly Adjustment. IRMA's not a nice lady, you know.
So Cobra's a snake.
Yeah, IRMA's not
a nice lady. Okay.
You got to remember these things,
yeah.
you know. And so this is how I remember them. But I also have had that scenario where someone was going on to Medicare. We recognized there was going to be a cost savings there, but not accounting for that high income. And it took me one time of making that mistake really early on in my career to realize how crucial that is. Make sure we have that discussion about income because it factors in, right? We're looking for what's that net cost? What are those net benefits at the end of the day? What's the whole scenario?
I think that's the really important thing is that when you're choosing to work with someone and decide what your Medicare choices will be, and you're figuring out, should I stay with my group plan? Should I leave my group plan? Should I go with Medicare? You need someone who has this kind of experience and can eliminate the mistakes for you because we've been down the road before. Yeah. So that's why it's really important to use an independent agent. You don't have to use PlanFit. Of course, we recommend PlanFit. We have trained the agents who work here. They actually work for us and they sit in meetings with us and we discuss all of these things and teach them the things that we have learned over our multi-year careers and the thousands of people we've helped. So they're skilled. But if you're not going to use PlanFit, then make sure the person that you use is independent, that they're going to give you advice about staying with your group plan, about going to Medicare, about potentially going with the Affordable Care Act. They're going to warn you about Cobra, the snake, and Irma, the mean lady, and all those things. Yeah. Because if you don't do it right, you will suffer. And one of the big consequences that can come is if you do it incorrectly, you could get lifetime penalties. Your Part B could penalize you. Your Part D could penalize you. And these penalties could last a lifetime. In fact, even Part A has a penalty, by the way. So there are ways to get penalized, and many of these penalties will last a lifetime. So you don't want to make a mistake. Make sure that you are working with someone who really knows what they're talking about and can help you to make a good decision about whether you should stay with your group plan or whether you should go to Medicare.